Over the years, there have been plenty of controversial moments in the UFC, admittedly some worse than others. However, there's often nothing more frustrating than when a fight is stopped prematurely. Of course, referees are there to protect fighters, but there have been too many examples of this over the years. Today, we're discussing 5 fights which many fans and commentators have suggested were stopped too early. Stay with us. First up, we're talking about Ion Cutelaba versus Magomed Ankalaev. This one was roundly criticized for being an early stoppage, and rightly so. Before the fight had even started, Cutelaba had run across the octagon to confront the Russian, and after the first bell, it didn't take long for the pair to come together. And come together they did. Ankalaev landed a nice left hook to the head of the Moldovan, which seemed to wobble his opponent, then followed up with a series of head kick attempts which were mostly blocked by Cutelaba. Ion was even throwing back at this point, albeit not landing, but neither was Magomed. As Ankalaev continued his onslaught, nothing clean landed, prompting Cutelaba to attempt a massive overhand right to stem the flow of the Russian's attack. However, somewhat inexplicably, the referee decided he had seen enough and came between the pair. Cutelaba instantly protested, meaning he was fully aware of his surroundings, and Michael Bisping in commentary even suggested that Cutelaba could have been employing the rope-a-dope tactics made famous by Muhammad Ali. Fans and commentators were instantly up in arms about the decision, and the UFC clearly agreed with them, booking the rematch to take place 8 months later. Unfortunately for Ion, that one would also end with the same result, but much less controversially as Ankalaev scored a clean KO win. What did you guys make of the Cutelaba versus Ankalaev stoppage? Too early? Next up, it's Drew Dober versus Leandro Silva. Stay with us. Referees run an extremely fine line of either getting things absolutely spot on or ruining their entire reputation, which is exactly what happened back in 2015 as Dober took on Silva in Rio. Eduardo Herdy decided to call the fight off in the second round after he believed Dober had tapped. He hadn't. The American had been caught in a guillotine by Silva, but it wasn't particularly tight. And just as he was about to free himself and get out of the submission attempt, the referee put an end to proceedings, announcing Silva as the winner. However, this wasn't the last we heard of the error, as Dana White instantly voiced his displeasure at what had gone down as not just one of the worst early stoppages, but one of the worst decisions in a UFC octagon in history. So much so that the Brazilian MMA Commission later decided that Herdy's call was clearly wrong, overturning the result of the fight to a no contest. Dana White later took to Twitter to commend the Brazilian MMA Commission on making what he and everybody else knew to be the correct decision, calling it the right thing to do. What did you guys make of this one at the time? Pretty wild, right? We're talking Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz next. This was actually Henry's last fight in the UFC before retiring, but some people believe that the referee was much too quick to call a stop to it. Cruz had acquitted himself well over the first round and throughout most of the second, before Cejudo sent him to the mat with a crushing knee to the head. Of course, sensing the finish, Henry followed Cruz down to the mat, taking his back and raining shots down on the former bantamweight king's head from behind. Admittedly, he did land around 10 unanswered left hands whilst controlling Cruz from behind, but Dom was in no way down and out. He was actively attempting to scramble to his feet and was obviously not unconscious, but some pointed to the fact that he wasn't throwing back. Of course, from this position, it would have been impossible for him to throw anything back, as he needed to either get to his feet or somehow get to his back and pull guard. It seems as though he was attempting the former, but referee Keith Peterson decided he had seen enough. After the fight, Cruz would call Peterson out, claiming he smelled like alcohol and cigarettes, and would later actively request to never be refereed by him again, saying, "I don't really feel safe with him as a referee," before going on to say, "But you can't control the commission." What did you guys make of this one? Uriah Faber versus Renan Barão 2 is coming through next. These two had previously fought a couple of years earlier, with the Brazilian securing a unanimous decision win. So when the rematch was booked, interest as to whether or not Faber could settle the score was high. However, the fight wouldn't last long, as Herb Dean appeared to stop it after seemingly being encouraged to do so by Barão. Faber was sent crashing down to the canvas as the former champion landed a huge straight right to his chin. Of course, Barão followed Faber down to the canvas, but Uriah successfully defended himself to get back up to his feet. However, he still appeared hurt as the pair again traded, but Barão put him down again with another big right hand, this time for good. As Uriah lay face down on the canvas, he appeared to be covering up, but Barão was raining down hammer fists fists onto the head of the California kid. At this exact stage, the Brazilian looked up at Herb Dean as if to say, "Are you going to call it or what?" Which the experienced referee then used as an excuse to actually call it. Looking at the situation objectively, Faber was in a pretty bad position, and had Barão taken his back from there would have been little he could have done to stop the inevitable. However, that hadn't yet happened, and Dean would come in for a lot of criticism after appearing to acquiesce to the whims of Barão, something which should never happen. We're talking Robbie Lawler and Ben Askren now. Stay tuned. Funky Ben Askren's first and last UFC win was mired in controversy as it appeared to be an incredibly early stoppage. Lawler had slammed Askren to the ground earlier in the round in an attempt to stop the former Bellator champion hanging on to him and utilizing his wrestling, and almost scored a super quick finish himself, but somehow Askren survived his barrage of bombs. Ben soon managed to get back to his feet and was visibly hurt, but somehow managed to quell the onslaught from Lawler, turning it into a grappling match against the cage. From here, Askren got the former UFC welterweight champ in a bulldog choke, and with Lawler's arm appearing limp, Joe Rogan could be overheard exclaiming that Robbie was out cold. Herb Dean obviously thought the same thing, but whether he had overheard Rogan and the rest of the commentary booth exclaiming that Lawler was out, we don't know. Concerned for Lawler's safety, Dean decided he didn't want to hang around and see if he was actually unconscious or not, and decided to call it. Of course, Lawler immediately sprang back to his feet, with Rogan then exclaiming, "He's not out." But the decision had already been made and the fight was over. One of the less egregious decisions in our opinion, as it was clear that Herb Dean thought Lawler was out cold. But that doesn't really explain why he didn't simply call out to Robbie for a response. What did you guys make of this one? And finally, some honorable mentions. Of course, there are plenty of other fights which have been stopped prematurely, from Pete Sell to Nate Quarry 1, to another possibly really bad call in the Marcus Silveira versus Kazushi Sakuraba fight. The Silveira finish came after John McCarthy jumped in to save Sakuraba from what he had thought was a clean punch from Silveira. What he hadn't realized, however, was that Sakuraba was actually going for a single leg takedown, and hadn't actually been hurt by Silveira at all. We then have the crazy submission stoppage on Mac Danzig by Yves Lavigne, who had decided Danzig was out cold in his bout against Matt Wyman. This one was especially bad because Danzig was actually defending himself when the referee decided to call it. There was also the early stoppage between Brendan Vera and Fabricio Werdum. The future Brazilian champion had mounted Vera but wasn't particularly landing nor hurting his opponent. This didn't seem to matter to Dan Miragliotta, however, as he decided that Vera probably had no way of getting out of the compromising position and decided to simply stop the fight. Later, Miragliotta would become synonymous with questionable stoppages, and it all started with this poor call. Let us know below if we've missed any off of our list today. As always, thanks for dropping in on us today, and remember to tune in again next time when we'll be discussing all sorts of other cool bits and pieces. And why not do us a big favor by liking today's video, whilst also sharing it with any UFC heads you might have on your friends lists. Bye guys!